The following podcast is a presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
To the Horror Academic's Guide to Movies. A few announcements this time before we get going. First off, the Horror Academic has made it into double digits. Yes, this is episode number 10. That's 10 times I hope you've clicked on me to hear my opinions on the most important movies in modern horror. Thank you for coming along with me on this journey so far, and who knows, one day we might hit triple digits. And bigger news for the show. Right about here, you're going to see a new thing show up. Right around here. It's not going to live here, but it'll show up here. We are now part of the Project Entertainment Podcast Network. I know. We're not technically a podcast. Pretty close. Yes, we were brought on board as part of PEN just last month, and this is our first episode since that partnership. So I'm real excited about this, and as someone who listens to Project Entertainment programs, I was really happy that this was a possibility. So thank you so much to Armand and Shelley over at Project Entertainment, and I hope I, do you guys justice. So more coming from that soon. You're going to notice that we're going to have some promos at the end for some shows that are part of our network at this point. Project Entertainment is now going to help get the news out about Horror Academic. So that's great. Look forward to something special coming over the summer because Scares That Care, and you guys have definitely heard me talk about Scares That Care before, has a lot of representation from Project Entertainment. So I'm looking forward to something special this year. So, all that aside, what is today's movie? Well, we're not diving as deep as usual. This one's not that long ago. Today we're going to be looking at Don Coscarelli's Bubba Ho-Tep. What's so special or important about a movie that came out of the 2000s? Right? I mean, has it been around long enough to be a classic? That's a valid question. Classic is a kind of an eye of the beholder kind of term these days. But I think there's a lot of things important about Bubba Ho-Tep. And the first thing we're going to learn about is kind of how the movie came to be. So, the story Bubba Ho-Tep was written by horror author Joe Lansdale. This is the version that came out in tandem with when the movie came out. So, Lansdale is a pretty different voice in the horror world. He doesn't really step in line with like the Stephen Kings or Dean Koontz or even Anne Rice or Clive Barker or any of the standards, right? He's a little out there, a little strange, a little different. These days I think we would start calling that bizarro in fiction, but Lansdale is long before bizarro. So he's a man who will tell whatever kind of story he wants to tell. Doesn't always fit into the horror genre per se, but it's this strange, bizarre, weird fiction, I think is a better term for Lansdale. There's not so many creepy crawlies, monsters, and things like that, but a story like the one that the story is based on, we're going to talk about the film today, does play with those tropes. So Bubba Ho-Tep is kind of like a southern fried version of a mummy story. And what's even more out there about it are the main characters dealing with this mummy. It takes place in a nursing home. Not a typical place for a horror movie, or actually most movies. I mean, like a Cocoon, how many other films take place in nursing homes? Not a lot. So it's a sect of the population that we don't usually pay attention to. And it's inhabitants at this particular nursing home is not your standard guys. Actually, you have someone who may be Elvis Presley and someone who may be John F. Kennedy. So already we know we're in the strange fiction world. Why would Elvis and JFK be fighting a mummy? That's kind of the pitch of the story, really. Is this man really Elvis? Maybe. Is this man really JFK? Maybe. Both their stories, I don't know if they add up, but they're possible in a very, not quite X-Files-ish, but in an odd things are out there kind of way. It's possible. They both tell their stories of how they came to be the people who the world believe are dead, and how they don't necessarily look like them anymore. So it's not as strange, maybe, for our Elvis character. But Kennedy is where it gets even more interesting, particularly in the movie version. And that's going to lead us to a discussion about casting, and that's another reason why this movie is so important. So the main character of Bubba Ho-Tep is Sebastian Hoff. Now, Sebastian may be a name that he picked up along the way, traded, as it were, so that people wouldn't kind of put him in the public eye anymore. But Sebastian, if you listen to him long enough, he'll tell you he's the king. But he's the king in hiding. I guess that's the best way to put it. And, you know, he got a little up in years, and a little something happened, and, you know, when you make your living as a Elvis Presley impersonator, even if you are the real king, when you get a little older and you throw your hip out, you end up in a nursing home anyway. So what's interesting about the casting of this film is that, if you don't know it already, Sebastian is played by Bruce Campbell. And who in the horror genre doesn't know Bruce Campbell? Quick refresher for those who are not in the know. Bruce Campbell is most popularly known for his important role in the Evil Dead franchise. He is, of course, Ash of Evil Dead 1, 2, and Army of Darkness, and then the series Ash vs. Evil Dead, which happened in recent days. Outside of that, you know, he had a lot of TV roles. Burn Notice was one. Before that, we had Briscoe County, which he played a cowboy. We had his roles in Hercules and Xena. Bruce has been kind of all over the place, and he's become a horror icon. He's kind of our Stan Lee, I guess. But Bruce, especially after he really hit the convention scene, because just everybody in the world wants to meet Bruce Campbell. And I completely understand, because I've met Bruce Campbell several times, and he's always worth meeting, and it's one of those things that, you know, he's going to be funny, he's going to be amusing, he's going to be a little bit heartwarming, if he likes it or not, and, you know, he's our hero, and I get it. But, so, by 2002, you know, Bruce was kind of at the height of him being kind of one of the kings of the nerds. It's kind of like him and Kevin Smith, you know. And he was all about it, and he was writing his books about his, you know, his time in the industry. And this kind of really grasped onto a time when he was really starting to become bigger. So the fact that he was still doing a fairly independent film was big news, because he hadn't jumped over. And that was important. This is a small movie with a lot to say. And it's one of those, if he hadn't already been Ash, I don't know if we would have accepted him in this kind of role, with this kind of importance, but it is the role of a lifetime. And he was made to play Sebastian, Elvis, both. So, Bruce Campbell, I could not see this film without him. The flip side of that, so who's playing our JFK? So Ozzie Davis playing JFK. Ponder that a moment if you haven't seen the film. He's an elderly black man playing a white man who's been dead for quite a while, but he has some interesting stories about how that came to be, which is a fun ride. And I think for a man who was in his 80s when he made this film, he has a lot of fun with it. And you can tell, I mean, he's played some very serious roles over the years, and this was a chance for him to just have some fun. And I love that he was completely in and was right along with Bruce all the way. Just, you could tell for him that this was the kind of gig he could enjoy. So, where do you know Ossie Davis from? Ossie Davis actually, before this, was pretty well known for Spike Lee movies. He had been in School Days, Do the Right Thing, Malcolm X, Jungle Fever. So he was a pretty regular on the Spike Lee kind of scene. But he started his career in the 50s. I believe his first credit is in 1950. He did a lot of television work. Horror fans may take note that Ossie Davis was in The Stand, the miniseries of The Stand. But he's a bit of a, he's an A-lister. He's a mainstream actor. He's someone who works in Hollywood. So for him to be in a small budget picture is even bigger than someone like Bruce Campbell to headline a smaller indie. So that's impressive too, that they reached out and got somebody who really you would expect maybe wouldn't do something like this, especially something as kind of odd and out there and bizarro and all the things that make this story great. So hats off to Ossie Davis for that. But let's go back a little bit and talk a bit about who Don Coscarelli and Joe Lansdale are. For horror fans everywhere, when you hear the name Don Coscarelli, instantly you think of Phantasm. And Phantasm is one of those wonderful stories that you get out of the 70s and 80s where horror filmmaking gets someone, an underground hit that propels their career. So Don Coscarelli makes the original Phantasm, and subsequently over the years, there are 5 of those featuring obviously the Tall Man and Reggie Bannister. Head on over to my other show, Indie Cult Horror, if you want to see my interview with Reggie. But these are horror mainstays. The Phantasm franchise is massive. He may have done a lot of work over the years, but Coscarelli is still an indie filmmaker at heart. And him going and making a film like the film we're talking about today, Bubba Ho-Tep, in 2002, after starting his career with an indie in 79, says a lot to me. He's a guy who still has an indie heart. So he's worked kind of big and small over the years. Another big highlight in his career is the Beastmaster. Arguably, people have different feelings about Beastmaster, but I grew up with it being on TV a lot as a kid, so I have fond memories, but I know not everyone does. But it's another series that he was attached to that took off. Coscarelli has done quite a bit. He's never strayed from the strange. Phantasm, while it is in many ways a stereotypical horror film in that it has the horror trappings, it takes place with an evil figure of the Tall Man who is over an army of the dead, who lives or occupies, a cemetery. These are all nightmarish imagery which would put Phantasm very obviously in the horror realm, but unlike most horror, and maybe if anything more like the horror that was coming out of Italy in the 70s, it's very nightmarish in nature to the point that it doesn't always make sense. I mean, we'll definitely do a Phantasm episode, if not more than one, because I am a fan of the franchise, but just know if you're not a Phantasm fan or if you have not watched those films, these aren't your typical horror films, even of the 70s. It's very abstract at times. Things are very piecemeal, and just like you're waking from a nightmare, it doesn't always add up. But it's still terrifying, and it's still effective. And it took a breath of time for him to sort out many of the mythos of his own creation. So something like Bubba Ho-Tep is not too far out of range for someone who it did not start in a very stereotypical manner of horror. Another film that Coscarelli made that I believe would definitely be in this bizarro kind of sensibility is John Dies at the End. Now, this is a novel that also takes place in strange orders. It takes several viewings to totally understand what you've seen. And it plays with your brain a lot. So Coscarelli is not a guy who's going to make a straightforward, he's not going to make a slasher, right? I mean, he's not going to be the guy to make Friday the 13th Part 14. It's not going to be him. But if you want a very strange picture that leaves you scratching your head and just enough scary and just enough strange, that's Coscarelli. He's your man. So that's why his works really well with Lansdale. Now, Lansdale is an author, like I said, who's not your typical horror writer. He's definitely in this kind of weird fiction realm. And Lansdale's no stranger, though, to adaptation. He worked with comic books for quite a while. Much of his televised stories were done through animated series like Batman and Superman, and even some of the more graphic adult kind of graphic novel stories like The Son of Batman. So he has experience writing for screen, but I mean, I wouldn't say that he's not someone who's going to conform his ideas and the strangeness of his stories. He's known for doing what he does. So you don't hire a Lansdale to make a story like a Stephen King, because it's not his wheelhouse and it's not his nature. And if you're going to have Lansdale, you're going to want him to do something strange and different. And different is a really good word for what he does. So aside from just Batman and Superman, Lansdale also was part of the Jonah Hex animated series of types. There was also a cable series based on two of his ongoing characters in his stories, Hap and Leonard. So he, there's TV work out there that works with Lansdale's style. Coscarelli and Lansdale worked together so well making Bubba Ho-Tep, or I should say Coscarelli loved Lansdale's writings so much, and Lansdale was happy with what Coscarelli did, that they teamed up again in ways that when there was the Masters of Horror series that Mick Garris had, and Coscarelli was asked to do an episode, he chose another Lansdale story. This was also a great opportunity to get the two of them together again, and it started the series off with a bang. And it's definitely not your average horror story, and Coscarelli's a great guy to do that with a Lansdale story. So all of this to say, Bubba Ho-Tep worked, right? So they did it again. But let's go back now to Bubba Ho-Tep. So let's boil down the reasons why Bubba Ho-Tep is important. We've talked a lot about the casting. So the casting is very important. These are key roles for the people involved. You also have, some cameo or smaller roles from Reggie Bannister, like we talked about from Phantasm. Gigi Bannister, his wife, has a little cameo in there. So it's definitely part of the family of Coscarelli work. But having Bruce Campbell at just the right moment in time, having Lansdale's story, and probably the broadest adaptation of one of his works, so it's a feature-length film as opposed to a television show or a single episode or anything along those lines, so we get the full story from his brain, and that's what's great about this. So you see the fiercely independent direction of Don Coscarelli, you see the completely realized weird tale of Joe Lansdale, you have Bruce Campbell at his peak. You have in a really indie film, you have some really well done special effects when we get to Bubba Ho-Tep himself, the mummy. This film has, because of Lansdale and because of the combination of Coscarelli and Campbell, it has a really great sense of humor. And maybe not the way Evil Dead 2 or Reanimator does, where it's just kind of laughing at the gore or being absurd in that manner. It's absurd in a different way. It's really taking something in some ways fiercely realistic and taking this very realistic setting, at least, and putting everything on its head. And that leads to some really funny stuff. You have it narrated by the Elvis Presley character. So Sebastian is the narrator, and you hear his brain, and that already sets the stage. I mean, it's silly at times, but it's still kind of heartwarming in an odd way. And that's another reason why I would say that this is important, isn't just the humor, but also the attention to, like I said before, an area that we don't tend to spend much time in, a nursing home, spending it with elderly people. These are not action heroes that we're used to. We're not, I mean, maybe we're slowly starting to see action heroes get older and dealing with it, but this was before that was really a thing. And it's forcing us to kind of maybe see a little bit in their eyes of what it's like to be in this place where most of them don't see their loved ones, or they're kind of forgotten in their families because they got old and were put in a place to be taken care of, and they're dealing with illness, they're dealing with just kind of just the everydayness of achy bones and taking their medicines and having cancerous cysts in very strange places. And that leads to a lot of the humor, but a lot of the heartwarmingness as well, of these could very well be real guys. And if you kind of shave off the layer that believes them, and if you look at it not as the story of, Elvis Presley and JFK fighting a mummy, but you look at it as probably the other characters in the film do, which is to say, one old man and another old man are dealing with kind of depression and dealing with these situations that they're left in of loneliness and maybe too much time to think about their own past, that they're trying to come up with one last hurrah of an adventure. And either way, thinking of this as their last hurrah, their last big adventure, and in some kind of odd buddy cop kind of way, I think that's really endearing as an audience member. And I think maybe, I've seen this movie many times, but rewatching it for the Blu-ray, I think maybe I was a little more in tune to that. Seeing, as it is, we get older and our loved ones get older, and you see this more, and you maybe are more aware of it with age. So, I think hats off to Lansdale to being brave enough to write a story that takes place in this kind of odd setting, and to Coscarelli to telling it, and of course to Ossie Davis and Bruce Campbell for making it real. So these are really wonderful reasons why you should watch this movie if you haven't. I highly recommend it. It's fun. It's at times, it could have been an EC comic story back in the day. And you get to really like these guys, and you want to see them succeed. Oh, and yeah, there's a mummy in the middle of Texas. Weird. So, check it out if you haven't. Now let's talk about my collection to do with Bubba Ho-Tep. So the movie came out in 2002, and there's also a long story of, it took them quite a while to get the movie out. Indie finding distribution shouldn't surprise you that it took a while for the movie to get out to the public. We knew about it long before we got to see it. And it had a very strong fan base from the get-go because there were so many people who, knowing the caliber that were going in, knowing Bruce Campbell and Don Coscarelli were teaming up to make this strong indie movie with some fun to it. We were all on board before we had to see anything more than a photo and the name. So it's kind of like the little engine that could kind of indie film. Unfortunately, a little bit forgotten, and only 18 years later, which is sad, but I'm hoping to shed some more light on it. Scream Factory definitely did their part in doing that. So let's build up to it, shall we? Of course, there was no Laserdisc or VHS for Bubba Ho-Tep's release. We have this wonderful DVD, though. The DVD by MGM, of all people, actually had quite a few extras on it. It was very grassroots kind of filmmaking, so there was a lot of behind the scenes being done on it. And with this edition, you got some really good commentary tracks. There's Don Coscarelli and Bruce Campbell together for a commentary. There's a commentary by The King. There is, and I'll try not to do that Elvis impersonation again. That wasn't very good. So, Lansdale reading an excerpt from the book. And Lansdale has such a great accent. If you get the chance to hear him read in person, I highly, highly recommend it, because he's a great storyteller who knows how to tell his own stories in his own voice really well. And he's got this southern fried way about him that brings his stories to life. So it's really cool. Make sure the excerpt of him reading it is on both versions. Highly recommend. Very cool. What else we have? We have deleted scenes with commentary. Yep. Usual stuff, right? The making of featurette. It's good. There's a how to make a mummy featurette, which is also good. The piece about costuming as Elvis. So Sebastian has flashbacks of being not just the king, but playing as a Elvis Presley impersonator. So, there's some sequin onesies going on. You know, it's very appropriate clothing. And they will get into detail about how there's only one company that makes those outfits and how they had to go through them to do those costuming scenes the right way. Really neat, kind of gross, really weird. And, you got the rest of the stuff you use guide. There's a featurette about making the score for the movie. And then there's a music video that accompanies that, which is good. And the rest of it's, common fare. Trailer, TV spots, blah, 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 photos, gallery. All good stuff. Right out of the go, it had a great edition on DVD. So, Bubba Ho-Tep on DVD. There you go. This version, which came out in tandem with the film of the book, if you look, it comes with introduction and story by Lansdale, and then introduction and screenplay by Coscarelli, which is pretty cool. You get to see both, you can compare them. It's very neat to see the process in that way. And, Coscarelli tells the story of how he found out about Lansdale's work. Is literally he just went into the local bookstore that he liked to frequent that had a lot of genre stuff and said, who should I be reading that I'm not? Or what's new and different? And the guy pointed out, hey, you should check out this Lansdale guy. If that guy hadn't made that recommendation, we might not have this great movie. So it's cool to see the story and then to compare it to the screenplay to see that process happen, which is nice. Recommend also. I don't know how easy this one is to find anymore, though. But definitely worth it. So, among the other things, there's not a lot of Bubba Ho-Tep stuff out there, but there are a couple of figures. We have our Sebastian figure here in the full Elvis regalia with his little walker. It's pretty awesome. I mean, it's made by Real Toys. They did a really good job. Late 90s, early 2000s. If you're a fan, this is a cool thing to have. So then let's get down to the Blu-ray itself. So you have, it's a Scream Factory, Shout Factory, like many of my favorites these days. You do have all of the great features that were on the DVD edition do make it over to the Blu-ray. So if you can't find the DVD, that's okay. It's all here for you. All those little featurettes, the commentary tracks, they're already here. So since the DVD extras are on here, they pay pretty good attention to adding new content you wouldn't have had before. One of those is a commentary track by Joe Lansdale, which is cool to hear the difference between his take on the film versus Coscarelli and Campbell. So that's a nice contrast. I like that. There are also interviews with Coscarelli and Campbell now, or now-ish, talking about the film, which is a nice little retrospective piece, which I really, really appreciate about these Scream Factory collector's editions, is that not only do you have kind of the press junkety stuff that we're used to, of the filmmaker making the film, talking about why this film's important and why it's going to be great and you're going to love it. That's all great, but it's PR. This is after the fact. I want to know the impact the film had, how you felt about the reaction from the audience. So that's all really important, and I think that's definitely breached in these documentaries, which is cool. So those interviews with Campbell and Coscarelli are great. You also have an interview with Kurtzman, Robert Kurtzman of KMB-FX, talking about doing the mummy effects, which is nice. I enjoyed that as well. Good look back kind of stuff. Generally, it's a solid edition. It was a wonderful reason to revisit a film I hadn't watched in a few years, and to remember how great it was, and for me to ponder why we aren't talking about it anymore, because it's a great movie. I love this movie. I can watch this movie all the time. Bubba Ho-Tep. Really, if you don't own it, I say you should. And that's why it's on my list of movies. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode talking about the great Bubba Ho-Tep. Oh, and really quick note, yeah, they keep talking about making a Bubba Nosferatu sequel. It's been on hold since this movie came out. So it's still listed as coming soon. We'll see what happens. I hope it does. So that's today's episode. Thanks again for coming back and checking out another movie with me from our collection of great modern horror Blu-ray special editions. Thanks again to Project Entertainment Network for bringing us on board. And I hope you guys at home who aren't familiar with their shows, check them out. I'm going to add a handy-dandy little promo right around here for one of the shows that I recommend. And take a listen to that, and I will see you next month here on the Horror Academic's Guide to Movies. Thanks again. Bye.
Armcast, Dead Sexy Podcasts. I'm your host, Armand Rosamilia. Fridays exclusively on Project Entertainment Network, where I interview authors, publishers, editors, artists, filmmakers, narrators, the lady from Walmart, whoever I feel like talking to. That's every Friday, Armcast, right here on Project Entertainment Network.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.